I'd worked at Maple Hollow Elementary for 5 years. It wasn't a flashy place, just pale brick, a sun-bleached playground, and rows of lockers painted an unconvincing shade of sky blue. And yet, for all its humble size, the school was the heartbeat of the town. Football games on fall evenings, science fairs in spring, familiar faces lined up in the gym for every fundraiser and bake sale. It was comfort, routine. And routine has a way of making you ignore little things you'd rather not puzzle over. The children's laughter carried differently here. The squeak of sneakers echoing through corridors polished too often, the odd smell of pencil shavings and floor cleaner that clung year-round. I knew the sound of the fire alarm, the hollow thump of basketballs in the gym, the metallic slam of lockers. I knew when noise was ordinary, and I knew when it bent into something else. The whispers started several weeks back. At first, it was just faint circles of kids gathered in the corner by the jungle gym. Then scrawled papers, bits of chalk left behind on the pavement, squiggled patterns I couldn't place. Other teachers brushed it off. Kids play pretend, don't feed into it. But the groups kept growing. One week, only 10 students gathered. The next, 20. By mid-month, half the recess yard sat in tight circles, chanting words just beyond reach of my ears. Teachers rely on patterns. Our job is spotting when something breaks the script, whether it's a sudden cough that spreads across a classroom or a bullying trick that picks up steam. But this didn't spread like gossip. It spread like ritual. Like every child already knew some part of it before they'd even been taught. I tried asking directly, what were they playing? Why weren't they joining kickball? Why sketch symbols instead of hopscotch squares? Their answers came curt, evasive. Just a game. You wouldn't get it. Often silence. That kind of stubborn unity kids only have when keeping something secret feels more important than playing it.
I wasn't supposed to hear the words. Not clearly, not fully. It was a Thursday night. Parent-teacher meetings had cleared the building, leaving the halls echoing with the scuff of my shoes and the faint whine of fluorescent lights cooling overhead. I stayed behind, mopping up a spill in the gym. The faint echoes of laughter drifted through the double doors. Children? At this hour? I crept toward the sound. Inside, clusters of students huddled in a dim semicircle at center court. At first, I thought it was innocent, a sleepover prank, an after-hours dare. But then came the rhythmic chant. Lantern, burn, fire, down, over and over. Their voices layered, monotone. I froze behind the bleachers, listening, counting the beats. The chant grew louder with each cycle, until lanterns I hadn't noticed before bloomed faintly in chalk across the gym floor. Dozens of them, ringed together, each chalk flame pointing downward. The room hummed. My stomach turned. And then one child faltered, their voice breaking high against the rhythm. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I whispered the missing line out loud, filling the gap without thinking. A reflex, like finishing a nursery rhyme overheard. Carry the dark, I muttered. The chant snapped dead. Every head turned in unison. Dozens of faces stared at me from the center court. Blank eyes, lips parted just slightly, as though the chant still hummed beneath their tongues. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then came the scream. Not mine, their scream. A unified cry that rattled the backboards and shook dust from the rafters. "You weren't supposed to say it," one girl shrieked, her face pale and trembling. Another boy sobbed outright, covering his ears.
It began on the playground. At first, I hardly noticed. Kids have their cliques and whispers. They invent games as often as they invent insults. But there was something off about this one. The huddled circles too tight, the laughter too strained, the way it all snapped to silence the second an adult walked by. Recess was usually bouncing kickballs and shrieking tag, but lately the students drifted in clusters toward the far end of the yard. It was the same group every day, their heads bowed low, hands covering scraps of paper they refused to show. Sometimes they'd hum together. Not a tune I recognized, more like a long, flat chant, rising faintly through the cracks in their whispers. I caught them looking at me once. Not mischievous, not guilty, defiant. It was a Wednesday when I finally heard the name. "The lantern game," a girl whispered, shielding her mouth so her friend could hear. The words floated just clear enough to catch the edge of my ear. When I stepped closer, the entire circle froze, eyes flicking everywhere but my face. Their papers crumpled quickly into fists.
"What's the lantern game?" I asked, keeping my voice light, like a teacher trying to prove he wasn't out of the loop. Silence. Not a fidget, not a cough. Then one boy finally leaned forward. His expression was flat, too serious for someone his age. "You're too old," he said. "You'd lose." The circle broke instantly, scattering toward the blacktop with the jangle of sneakers on pavement, their laughter too brittle, too rehearsed. But the words rooted deep in my brain and refused to leave. A game the kids all knew, but none of them would ever teach us. And a game, apparently, that adults couldn't survive.
The chalk lanterns bled darker against the wood as the wet ash seeped through the paint. My pulse clenched in my throat, refusing to move. Somewhere, deep beyond the floorboards, something stirred back at me. Scratching. Crawling. The overhead lights flickered. I stumbled forward, hands raised, stammering apologies. I didn't mean... The children were already scattering, darting toward gym doors that burst wide with no hands touching them. Their cries echoed off lockers into silence, leaving me alone on the waxed floor. The air grew unbearably heavy. The chalk symbols shimmered faintly, as though heat rippled above them, and in the middle ring, where children had kneeled, the wood stretched downward, not broken, stretched, like a face pressed against rubber from beneath. I backed toward the wall, pulse shrieking through my ears. "Carry the dark," a voice croaked back at me. My own words, but distorted. A mockery stretched through broken throat. Nothing living said it. It carried from inside the wood. I fled the gym, crashing into the hallway. My shoes left streaks of water from unconscious sweat drenching me. Far behind, the chanting resumed, softer, muffled, but no longer belonging to the children. Something else had picked it up. That night, when I finally returned home, shoving my keys twice into the wrong lock for how badly my hand shook, the phrase wouldn't leave my skull. You weren't supposed to say it. I had broken one of their rules, and whatever the lantern game was, now it had noticed me.
There were marks, too. Chalk drawn faintly in strange shapes by the monkey bars. Lanterns, crudely sketched with flames drawn upside down as though the fire burned downward instead of up. The symbols appeared in notebooks as well, curved patterns between math problems. Outlines pressed so deep into paper, the tips tore through. I confiscated one or two at first, but the replacements multiplied faster than I could keep up. At faculty meetings, I tried to raise the issue. Have you noticed them chanting during recess? Heads shook. One or two shrugged. It's a fad, someone said. Kids make up creepy things all the time. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It deepened. I remember standing one afternoon in the teacher's lounge, gazing through the window into the playground. Nearly the whole blacktop gathered into groups that day. Circles closed tight, shoulders pressed. No laughter now, just rhythmic tilting, synchronized swaying, humming in one note. It looked wrong, not like any game I'd seen, more like rehearsal. And when one child finally noticed me watching, her head jerked toward the window. The humming ended abruptly. Dozens of pairs of eyes followed in unison, blank and unblinking, fixing straight on me. I dropped the blind so fast the chain rattled. Maple Hollow Elementary was supposed to be safe, predictable, a nest of order, and yet what whispered there among the children was something synchronized,
something I wasn't meant to hear. The worst part? Day by day, I caught more students joining in, including ones I'd taught since first grade. Familiar faces I knew well, all pulling tighter into the lantern game, like it had been waiting for them, like it would always have waited for them. And I knew, at last, that this wasn't just pretend.
It was Friday afternoon when I first heard the name spoken deliberately, not whispered under breath, not hidden between giggles, but chanted. I was walking the perimeter near the back fence when I caught the rhythm, a low murmur at first, then rising as if their confidence swelled with every word. Lantern, lantern, lantern. Dozens of voices woven into one. The circle was bigger this time, nearly the entire fourth grade tightly packed on the blacktop, their faces tilted inward. From where I stood, it looked less like a game and more like a ritual. "All right, kids, break it up," I called. No one moved, not a peep, not a shuffle, just that steady, deliberate chant, their voices blending with unnerving precision. By the time I pushed through the outer ring, the words cut off in unison. Every head jerked upward, dozens of eyes staring at me at once. There was no laughter, no scurrying in guilt like I expected, just silence, an oppressive kind that settled heavy on my chest. "What's the lantern game?" I asked, forcing calm into my voice. A long pause followed. Then one boy, smaller than the rest, narrowed his eyes like I'd just broken some unspoken protocol. His words came low, deliberate. "You can't play." "Why not?" "Because you're an adult. Adults vanish." A ripple of uneasy smiles passed through the group, though none of them laughed, not really. The sound was too hollow, too knowing.
The circle broke apart at last, children scattering like spilled marbles across the yard. But one scrap of paper fluttered loose from the center, half crumpled against the asphalt. I bent down, pretending to tie a shoe, and slipped it into my pocket. Later, alone, I unfolded it at my desk. The picture was crude. A lantern, drawn in pencil smears, flame sketched upside down. Beneath it, jagged letters spelled out 5 words. "When adults play, they burn." I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. It would have been easy to dismiss this as some gross joke, but there was intention here. These symbols had been appearing everywhere for weeks, scratched into playground equipment, doodled in margins, pressed deep enough into desks to scar the wood. Over and over, the lantern flame burning downward. And always, guarded. Whenever we drew near, they'd crumple their notes, lock lips between teeth, clamp their secrets tight. This wasn't just a made-up rhyme or silly ghost story. It was something children protected, something set apart, unpatchable by anyone with the audacity to grow older than them. The lantern game wasn't a toy. It was a boundary, one they refused to let us cross. And in that moment, staring at childish letters scrawled with impossible weight, I realized I wanted to know how deep it went. What exactly were they protecting? And why did the thought of finding out feel like pulling at the edge of a noose?
It started small, so small most teachers wrote it off as childish antics, but I knew better. One recess, while supervising, I noticed a girl named Hannah slip out of the circle during their chant. She jogged toward the gym doors, which were locked as always during play hours. I blinked, turned to greet another student tugging my sleeve, and when I looked back, Hannah was gone, vanished between blacktop and double doors. I checked inside. Empty gym, doors still bolted. 3 minutes later, she emerged from the opposite side of the yard, clothes damp as if she'd been caught in a downpour no one else felt. When I asked where she'd been, she simply smiled. "Playing lantern," she said, as though that explained everything. The vanishings grew bolder. 2 boys disappeared behind the tool shed that backed up against brick walls and fencing. I followed immediately, circling the shed within seconds. Nothing but grass. Yet when I doubled back, the boys were already in line for the drinking fountain on the far side of the playground. Mud streaked their shoes. Another child was spotted reappearing from the art room, locked for renovations all week. The principal found him humming at a desk surrounded by paint jars that hadn't been used in months. Even hallways weren't immune. One week I was pushing a mop bucket down the corridor after hours, when I heard giggling ahead. 2 silhouettes darted into a supply closet. I hurried after them, keyring in hand, but found the closet untouched, dust thick on the floor, shelves bare. As I turned, heart rattling in my ribs, the giggling echoed 3 floors above. Each time I pressed for answers, I got the same refrain: shrugged shoulders, evasive eyes. We were playing lantern.
The faculty meetings grew tense as well. Reports of kids gone missing from attendance sheets, only to turn up moments later, confused but unharmed. Some of the staff blamed inattentive supervision. Others mumbled about stress, about imaginations running too wild. But when I raised the issue of symbols, chants, and vanishing behind locked doors, I was met with uncomfortable laughter. Folklore, someone dismissed. But at night, when the classrooms emptied and the fluorescent lights dimmed, I felt something lingering in those halls. Like the walls themselves stretched longer the later the hour, leading to corners that hadn't been there the day before. The breaking point came when I followed a set of wet footprints. It was a rainy Thursday, a curtain of storm smearing the windows. In the East Wing hallway, puddles trailed in single file, too neat to belong to children scattering. The line of prints stopped cold at a blank stretch of wall beneath the stairwell. Not at a door, not at a drain, just ended. And smeared faintly above them, written in condensation across the painted cinder block, were 2 crooked words: "You're next." That phrase wasn't childish, it wasn't playful, it was deliberate. What terrified me most wasn't the writing itself, it was the size of it. Not crayon or chalk, finger streaks, long and thin, pressed high enough that no child in the school could have reached without a ladder. I stood frozen, mop handle trembling in my grasp, cold sweat burning stripes down my spine. The lantern game wasn't just about vanishing. It was about going somewhere else, somewhere they could pass through walls, slip behind doors, and return with damp clothes and knowing smiles. And I was beginning to suspect it was no longer limited to them.
Curiosity is a dangerous thing in a school. Children sense it like blood in the water. The more you dig, the more they tighten circles, daring you silently with watchful eyes. I started cataloging, quietly. During free periods, I swept the halls slower than necessary, clipboard in hand, though I wasn't marking supplies. I marked symbols. And once you looked for them, they were everywhere. The lantern emblem, drawn with descending flame, spread like a rash across the building. Pencil outlines carved faintly into desktops were varnish chipped. Chalk smudges across playground asphalt that didn't align with hopscotch grids. Sharp, knife-edged scratches along bathroom stalls, the flame always etched downward, as though heat was falling, not rising. Even the library wasn't immune. Flipping through leftover textbooks, I found doodles scratched into margins that didn't match any child's penmanship. The lantern appeared again and again, sometimes paired with childlike phrases. Light goes down. Follow the flame. Over and over. One notebook stood out, abandoned under a desk after dismissal, its spiral bent and torn. At first, I thought it belonged to a student. Inside were pages of scrawls, hundreds of lantern sketches, crowded edge to edge until there was no white left. Some marked with dates, others with numbers in uneven red ink. But halfway through came a chilling sketch that froze me stiff. A crude drawing of the school itself. Windows, doors, stairwells, all shown in pencil. And inside each outline, tiny lanterns hung like dripping spots of ink. Along the bottom, a phrase written twice. Every hallway leads down.
I confronted a student whose handwriting vaguely resembled the scrawl.
When I showed him the notebook, his lips pressed tight. No denial, no excuse. He only shook his head and said, "You shouldn't keep that." His voice carried all the weight of a warning. By now, I tried warning colleagues, told the math teacher about closet vanishings, told the principal about footprints into blank walls, about the notebook. The laughter dropped quick, smiling faces turning cold, quietly begging me to stop pressing. "Kids make things up," one said. "You're giving them fuel." But the looks in the children's eyes weren't playful. They carried an awareness too deliberate, too shared, like members of a secret already acknowledging each other with every smirk, while leaving me locked out. Every night after, I noticed something new by my desk. A lantern sketch left on a sticky note, a chalk smear across my blackboard, small warnings or invitations. Whatever the lantern game was, they weren't just playing it anymore. They were drawing me into it.
The children avoided me for days after the gym incident. Where before their eyes held mischief, now they filled with open fear whenever I drew near. Whispers cut short, circles collapsed, and whenever I passed by, little shoulders hunched tight like I had contaminated them. I thought maybe they'd moved on. Maybe my intrusion had spoiled their secret game. But then, 3 mornings later, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, just folded notebook paper, edges torn, graphite smudged into my palm as I unfolded it. The rules were listed crudely in uneven handwriting. Beneath each, a small lantern doodle, flames all pointing downward. The lantern game. Rules. Rule 1. The lantern must always be lit, but never by you. Someone else must light it for you, or you are lost. Rule 2. Follow the voice that calls from the dark hallway. Do not choose another path. Rule 3. If the lantern is offered to you and you are older than 13, refuse. Adults burn. Rule 4. If you lose the flame, you must wait. Do not move. If you move, you disappear. Rule 5. When you return, do not tell. If you tell, the next game takes you back forever. At the bottom, smeared and nearly illegible, was one last addition. Extra rule. Don't let them notice when you're writing this. My throat dried. The way the paper was crumpled, hurried, meant a child had slipped it there terrified, confessing in secret, betraying the game even though it broke Rule 5. I stared at the note until the bell rang, the hairs on my arms stiff as static. That afternoon, during recess, I caught the boy who always looked half guilty in their circles. His eyes darted everywhere but mine, his lips pressed too tight. "You wrote this," I whispered. "I didn't mean it as accusation, more plea." Tears welled instantly. He shook his head once, violently. "You weren't supposed to say the words," he muttered back. "Now it knows you." The bell rang again. He sprinted into the crowd before I could stop him. I read the rules 10 more times that night, pacing the narrow length of my kitchen, hands trembling. Adults burn. The phrase burned brightest of all. It explained everything. Why they never let us listen. Why they mocked with, "You're too old." Why they shut their mouths when confronted. This wasn't a playground chant or ghost story pretending at consequence. Something enforced these rules. Something whose voice slipped down hallways at night, luring those too young to understand finality. And now, after one careless mistake, I had spoken the chant aloud. The lantern game had noticed me, and I had no way of following its rules to survive.
It happened the following Monday. The school was quiet after dismissal, light slanting gold through long windows as I made rounds. I told myself I'd just check the east wing before heading out. Habit. Denial. But the truth is, I felt it already, something waiting, breathing with the weight of my mistake. I turned the corner by the trophy case and froze. The hallway stretched. It shouldn't have. I knew every inch of Maple Hollow. 12 doors, stairwell at the end, nothing more. But now the corridor lengthened like taffy pulled in both directions. Shadows deepened, swallowing track lighting until all I saw was a narrowing tunnel lit by a single glow. A lantern. It flickered faintly halfway down, flame burning downward, just as sketched. My stomach lurched. It was inside the hallway. And then came the voice. Follow me. Not a student's giggle or a prank. This was lower, warped, carried on vibrations that scraped bone. The words reverberated from the dark, blending with the lantern's pulse. I stumbled forward despite myself.
Each step echoed wrong, tapping back delayed as though from several feet behind where I actually was. The trophy case dissolved, replaced by slick stone walls that dripped faint condensation. Floor tiles warped into wood planks that groaned beneath weight that wasn't just mine. Then I saw them. Shoes. Dozens scattered along the hallway edges. Tiny sneakers, flower-patterned slip-ons, Spider-Man Velcros, abandoned like their owners had stepped out and never returned. Tongues wilted, laces frayed. A chill burrowed between my ribs. One pair I recognized instantly, a bright pink set Hannah always wore. The voice returned, closer. Carrie, the dark. The lantern flame hissed lower, smoke curling in reverse, downward, sucked into cracks in the wood. My own breath followed, chest tightening as if the hallway itself was swallowing air. I bolted, firing down the corridor. Behind me, the lantern guttered, plunging shadows after me like a wave. Nearly blind, I clawed for the stairwell rail that should have been there, only to find wall, endless wall. And then, ahead, a door. Wooden, rust-stained, steaming faintly as though cold breath exhaled through the cracks. I slammed my shoulder into it. The corridor snapped. Light filled my eyes. I tumbled into the teacher's lounge. Same cracked coffee pot, same bulletin board, sweat dripping into my collar as though I'd sprinted a marathon. Only one thing remained from that impossible hallway. On the teacher's lounge table, a lantern sat quietly, flame flickering downward, waiting.
I couldn't stop thinking about the shoes. The hallway had dissolved behind me, leaving nothing but fluorescent buzz. Yet those shoes, scuffed and abandoned, haunted my mind as much as the downward flame. When I returned to the teacher's lounge the next morning, the lantern was gone. No one mentioned it. No one else seemed to notice anything strange at all. I needed answers, something beyond chalk sketches and clumsy whispers, so I went digging. Schools keep records, attendance sheets, incident logs, old yellowing files left to rot in cabinets. I convinced the secretary to let me down into the archives beneath the front office, a room smelling like damped paper and dust. Hours bled away as folders stacked around me, until at last patterns began emerging. The disappearances stretched back decades. Student failed to return home from recess, later presumed runaway. Child went missing, last seen near gymnasium hallway during storm. 1983, 1999, 2008. Every decade at least one or two. Always the same. Unexplained vanishings during school hours, written off as family problems, custody disputes, irresponsible parents. The phrasing was clinical, unemotional, like each entry had been written by someone determined to drain it of horror. But the photographs told another story. In one folder, a clipping showed a line of students standing outside Maple Hollow Gym after another disappearance.
At the edge of the image, chalk circles faintly decorated the asphalt. Lanterns, sketched downward, exactly the same as the ones I'd confiscated. The lantern game wasn't new.
The deeper I combed, the more it seemed woven into the bones of the school. Punishments handed out in the 60s for chalk drawings in bathrooms. Principal memos warning staff not to indulge weird ghost stories. Even graffiti in torn Bibles tucked into the chapel box. Inverted flames scrawled across psalms. And yet, nobody had stopped it. Somewhere between 2010 and today, official mentions dried up. No more reports, no more warnings. Almost as if someone decided silence was better than acknowledgement. As if speaking the words gave it weight. But the students hadn't stopped. They never stopped. Hannah's pink sneakers came back to me, sitting lonely along impossible hallway walls. I flicked through photographs of presumed runaways, smiling faces, baseball uniforms, Girl Scout sashes. Not one of their bodies was ever found. And I realized the truth clawing at my gut. They hadn't run away. They hadn't been stolen by parents or strangers. They'd gone wherever the lantern game led them. I slammed the filing cabinet shut, pulse raging in my ears. When I climbed back upstairs, a hallway felt longer than it had earlier. Not stretched yet, not impossible, but subtly altered. Like the architecture itself was waiting for permission. At dismissal, I stood by the doors, watching children filter out. Laughter, chatter, backpacks slung wide. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to tell them all to stop, to tear the chalk from their hands. But then a boy noticed me watching. His lips curled faintly, knowingly. You were there. Not a question. A statement. I froze, throat tight. You followed the lantern. Then he vanished into the line of buses before I could grab him, left me shivering in the doorway as diesel exhaust clouded the sky.
I didn't choose to enter the game again. It chose me. The week after uncovering the archives, I stayed late to finish grading. The building was empty. Too empty. When the PA system crackled to life. Not an announcement, not a voice, but a low hum, distorted as if the speakers themselves were exhaling. The hallway lights dimmed one by one until only the exit sign's red glow remained. And then a lantern appeared. Not drawn, not imagined. A real lantern. Sitting in the middle of the hallway outside my classroom door. Its handle glistened with rust. The flame burned downward in strange curling smoke that pooled across the linoleum like spilled ink. My stomach locked. Every piece of sense in my body screamed, "Don't touch it." But the air shifted, thickened. A tug caught behind my ribs, pulling me forward. One child's voice whispered faint and hollow, "Take it." My hand lifted against my will. Fingers wrapped the cold metal handle. The lantern blew to life in my palm. The flame hissed, crackled, and then bit me. My skin seared instantly, blackening where the handle made contact. The pain bit down into bone, heat burrowing deeper, as though the flame burned inside me. I staggered, screaming, but the hallway warped, stretching again. Doorways vanished, lockers dissolved, and the long tunnel appeared in their place, shoes scattered along the edges. Except, now I saw something else. Bodies.
Adults, not children. Their shapes bent unnaturally into the wood of the walls. Their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. Hands elongated, clawing outward, fused into the corridor, as if the hallway itself had devoured them. Their eyes glowed faint embers, extinguished one by one as I stumbled past. "Adults, burn," the whispers chorused, each voice echoing from the fused figures. Flame feeds on years, on age, on regret. The lantern in my palm howled with fire, unnatural flames licking downward. Smoke pouring across my arms, burrowing into veins. Flesh peeled. My pulse felt like magma. I tried desperately to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't unclench. The handle had fused into my skin. "Children are light. Adults are ash," the voices sang, harmonized with distant giggles. Shadows stretched longer, reaching for me from the corridor floor. Small shapes darted just out of sight, childish laughter echoing through the endless tunnel. I realized with bone-deep horror, children didn't vanish because they lost. They vanished because they won. In those of us too old, too heavy with years, we were fuel. My vision blurred. Fire bled across my nerves. Screams rattled in my chest and scattered into silence. Darkness nipped the edges of my sight as shadows pressed closer, little hands reaching out to pull the light from me. At the last second, the lantern coughed, a gout of smoke, a hiss as though some internal rule had been broken. With one vicious jolt, the handle unclasped, flinging itself from my grip. I stumbled backward, clutching scorched hands, collapsing into the wall. The corridor split, light fractured, and suddenly, fluorescent hum snapped back. Painted lockers, thumbtacked bulletin boards. Normal, except for the stench of charred flesh around me, except for the blackened scars curling across my palms, lantern marks, forever burned into the skin.
For days afterward, I couldn't use my hands without smelling the burn. The scars were lantern-shaped brands, blackened and ridged, etched so deeply it felt less like an injury and more like possession. The pain lingered, deep in marrow, a reminder every time I flexed my fingers. I spent those nights poring through the oldest archives, the ones too brittle to scan. Local history books described Maple Hollow's founding, but beneath the civic pride and sanitized stories lay footnotes, scratched beneath margins and scribbled comments made by someone who knew more. The lantern game wasn't new. It wasn't even modern. In 1871, long before the school stood, children in the region played something called the Ashen Path. Accounts described strange lanterns set on crossroads and chants urging the young to follow whispers in the dark. The game appeared seasonally, vanishing for generations, only to return with children reciting its rules that shifted but always carried the same warning. Adults cannot play. Adults burn. Local folklore insisted it was a binding ritual, a pact. Centuries ago, something ancient, hungry, demanded offerings. But while adults with heavy souls fed the furnace, children could pass through without being consumed. Their innocence acted like insulation. Their unformed years made them light enough to slip through shadows, touch the flame, and return.
But innocence comes at a cost. Those who played were warned never to speak of it. Legends scribbled by local pastors insisted that a whispered tale is a lantern lit, each retelling fueling the ritual, birthing another round of games. Silence was survival. It made sense now. The missing kids weren't random. They were the ones who lost, the ones tricked out of the protective shell of innocence. Or maybe they told. Maybe they whispered the rules to trusting ears. Either way, when the flame touched them, they stopped existing. Adults, however, had no protection. Every regret, every wound, every scar from living gave the fire meat to dig into. Teachers, janitors, parents, anyone over 13 was tinder. The flame clung to them until nothing remained but skins stamped to walls, forever part of the lantern game's corridor. That explained the bodies I'd seen fused into the endless hallway, screaming faces locked in wood, adults who'd tried to help, who'd tried to play alongside their children, punished not by chance, but by rule. And the laughter, always the laughter, wasn't mockery, it was legacy. The children weren't inventing this, they were inheriting it, passing along pieces of ritual older than this entire town, bound by rules they barely understood but enforced by something that demanded the game continue. I thought about Hannah's pink sneakers, abandoned just out of sight in that impossible corridor. Maybe she had passed through safe. Maybe her innocence kept her light, carried her down paths not meant for me. Or maybe she had whispered. Maybe her shoes were all that remained. The lantern game didn't belong to the students. It never had. It belonged to whatever old thing chose them every few decades, forcing them to light a flame that burned downward, feeding on all the years their parents carried. It dawned on me, sobering and cold. Innocence isn't just protection, it's currency. The game allowed children to enter because they brought nothing. The older you grew, the more weight you carried, and that weight was exactly what the lantern wanted to eat. I had broken their rule, and the flame was hungry.
The lantern game didn't end after my discovery. If anything, the scars burned hotter, like they knew I'd finally uncovered the truth. That Friday, as dismissal poured into the buses with honking horns and waving parents, I caught the circle again. Middle of the playground, children pressed shoulder to shoulder. Their chant hummed low, almost a purr. None of the other staff reacted. No one, not a single adult, turned their head, but the students glanced at me. Every single one. One boy, Jacob, quiet and pale, broke away from the group. He shuffled toward me, clutching that same battered notebook pressed to his chest. He trembled as he passed it off, eyes wide, whispering too quietly for anyone else to hear. "They want you to play again." My stomach collapsed into knots. I stared past him into the circle. Their bodies swayed in unison, mouth-shaped words I couldn't quite catch, but something deep inside told me what they were chanting. My name. That night, I woke to find a lantern sitting on my kitchen table. I hadn't brought it home. It glowed faintly, flame pointing downward, burning smoke straight into the scar on my palm. I gagged, stumbled back, but every light in the house flickered out in unison. The air filled with children's giggles, twined with something deeper. A chorus beneath, guttural and vast. I remembered the rules. Rule 3, if you're older than 13, never take the lantern. I didn't touch it. But God help me. It moved on its own, sliding closer across the table with a grinding squeal of iron until it bumped against my gut. The flame hissed, flaring white, and for a breathless second, I felt the corridor stretching behind my walls, waiting to drag me down again. I bolted out the door into the night, sprinting across dark streets illuminated only by flickering street lamps. Behind me, faint and muffled, the chant carried on. Lantern burn, fire down, carry the dark. I didn't stop until I reached Maple Hollow itself. I don't know why I ran there, only that my body obeyed an instinct. Unfinished games never forgive cheaters. The building loomed silent. Doors gaped wide, though no janitors had stayed late. Inside, chalk circles stained the gym floor, fresh, sprawling. Hundreds of little lanterns overlaid one another until they swallowed the entire court. At dead center sat the flame, real now, not chalk. White fire burning in reverse, digging into the ground like a mouth, chewing through the earth. The heat blistered my skin instantly, forcing me to shield my eyes. And in the soot black smoke rising from it, faces appeared. Some I recognized, missing children across decades, their expressions hollow, eyes faintly glowing. Some were my colleagues who'd brushed me off, laughing away the evidence, taken not by accident, not by chance. They'd played too. They'd lied. And the lantern game always collects its debt. The flame pulsed toward me, hunger stretching like arms. And in that moment, I understood the cruelest truth of all. You never choose to play. You're chosen. My scar seared until my knees buckled. The faces screamed in silent chorus, mouthing fragments of rules I'd already learned too well. I staggered backward, slamming through the gym doors and throwing myself into the rain outside. They didn't follow. They didn't need to.
The game had already claimed me once. It would again. And now, it waits.
I don't sleep long anymore. Lights flicker when I close my eyes. Sometimes I see chalk lanterns smudged on my own walls by dawn. Sometimes I hear the absent shuffle of shoes trailing me in empty hallways. I'm marked. I don't know how long I have before the lantern game pulls me back for good. But you, yes you, reading this, listening to this, need to understand. This isn't confined to Maple Hollow. This isn't about one school, one class of children. It's older. It's passed like a secret toy box from playground to playground, state to state, generation to generation. And when it arrives where you live, you'll know. You'll hear the whispers in the playground corners. You'll notice chalk sketches of lanterns burned upside down. You'll see children pause when you approach, laughter cutting short. When it happens, don't ask to play. Don't press them. And if you hear them chanting, don't finish the rhyme. Because if you do, the flame will turn toward you. And once it notices you, you can't escape. Remember this: every hallway leads down. Every lantern burns. And adults don't survive. So when the kids at your local school start whispering about a game you can't play, don't laugh. Don't pry. Just walk away, because you won't get another chance.